Miss Angie, thank you for doing those songs. Um, they they really tie in with what I'm going to speak about this morning. And Miss Angie and I didn't plan that, but and not so much of the words of the song, but the structure of the songs. Really, as I was sitting there listening to them, I'm like, wow, it makes sense, and we'll get to that. You'll see in a moment. Um, if you have your Bibles, turn to the book of Exodus, chapter 12. I This morning, I was telling Brian beforehand, I don't have much of a sermon this morning. It's more of a teaching lesson, but I'm going to be talking about the plagues, the 10 plagues that were brought against Egypt. Excuse me, and the meaning behind them, the ideas behind the plagues. Um, when I was in school, I wasn't a big fan of school, but I did like my English class. I did like English classes, and one of the reasons that I love literature. I love learning about stories and things like that. And one thing that they always talked about in English class it was mythology, and I've always found that really interesting. The different ideas and different cultures and things like that. And the probably the most common mythology and that most of us would be familiar with is Greek or Roman mythology. Um, we have a lot of those carryovers, and even in our society today. I mean, yesterday was Saturday, which it comes from Saturn's day, which is the Roman god. Our planets are named after these Roman gods, so it's still very familiar to us. Um, and a little lesser extent, but still a common mythology to know stories from is Norse mythology. Um, it's more whereas in the Greek mythology you have a lot of focus on the gods and what they do, and what they do is so separate from what humans should do. There's a disconnect between that. But in Norse mythology, their gods feel very much just like legendary heroes. It's not as much of these other creatures that are doing these godly things, but it's Norse mythology. It focuses on these heroes. But one culture that I've never really gotten into until very recently is Egyptian mythology. And just show of hands, real quick, how many of you guys know anything about Egyptian mythology? Okay, so maybe 5 or 6 people. All right. So this morning, I'm gonna give you a crash course. All right, and I preface this with I am by no means an expert in this at all. All right, I've over the past month or two, I've been reading a couple books about Egyptian history and Egyptian mythology in preparation for this sermon series that Jeremy and I are doing. So I want to share with you a little bit, because I'm a firm believer that if we understand more about a culture, we'll be able to understand more about what the Bible is talking about these cultures. All right, and I hope you realize that as we go on. So the title of my sermon this morning is Ma'at and Isfet. All right, and when I told Brian that this morning, Amanda responded, of course, with "bless you," because it sounds so weird. But it's these in Egyptian mythology. It's these two concepts. It's the concept of order and chaos. All right, and something you need to understand about Egyptian mythology is it's very dualistic. There's two of everything. There's man and woman, there's earth and sky, there's order and there's chaos. All right. So Ma'at is order, it's justice. It's the way things are supposed to be. All right? And Isfet is chaos, disorder, injustice, the way things should never be. All right? If the Nile River was flowing like it's supposed to, then that is Ma'at. If the Nile River was in a drought and the water had stopped flowing, that is Isfet. It's chaos. If the Nile floods annually like it's supposed to water the ground and to fertilize the ground, then that's Ma'at. That's the correct order. But if something goes wrong with that flooding, then that's Isfet. That's disorder. That's chaos. And another thing about Egyptian mythology, before I even really get into their myths or anything, there's two of everything, but everything is also cyclical. All right, so everything goes in a circle. So there are some gods in Egyptian mythology that are their own grandfather. Okay, it gets really confusing. It gets super confusing because not only are things cyclical, but things are also, they merge with each other. Whereas in Greek mythology, Zeus, and in every story, he is Zeus, and you know how he's going to act in every story. In Egyptian mythology, sometimes Ra is Ra. Sometimes the god Ra is Amun-Ra, who has a different personality. And sometimes the god is Khatu-Ra, who has a different personality. And sometimes the god is Ra-Atum, who also has a different personality and different responsibility and different tasks that he does. So it's multifaceted. There's lots of different parts that mesh together, like the first song that we sang, different parts that meshing together. And it's also cyclical of things going around in a circle, like the All in All song and doing the round. So that's why I said it's fitting that we did those two songs, because they really fit in with this mythology. So as a quick overview, all right, there are 9 main gods. All right, there's Ra, who is the god of the sun, the creator god. All right, and Ra had 2 children, Shu and Tefnut. All right, Tefnut is sometimes referred to as Ma'at itself. All right, so Tefnut is a symbol of order and the way things should be. Shu is associated with the atmosphere. Shu is the god that holds up the sky. All right, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, have a little picture of like Atlas in your head, okay? And then Shu and Tefnut had 2 children, and their children it was Geb, who is the god of the earth, and Nut, who is the goddess of the sky. All right? So like I said, just real quick overview. So Geb and Nut had 4 children. Osiris, and these are some of the gods that may be a little more familiar to you if you know anything about Egyptian mythology. Osiris, who eventually became king of the dead. All right. Also, one of their children was Set, who was think more of like a Satan figure in their mythology. He's an antagonist. All right. And they had 2 daughters, Isis and Nephthys. All right. Isis is a very prominent figure in a lot of their myths. Nephthys, she's there because I guess they needed a certain number. All right. So there's 9 main gods. It's called the Aeneid of Heliopolis. All right. So you don't have to take notes. Like I said, just quick overview. All right. The Aeneid of Heliopolis. These 9 gods, and then there was one more. Osiris and Isis had a son, and his name was Horus. All right, you may be familiar with Horus without even realizing it. How many of you guys have ever gotten a prescription from the pharmacy? All right, you've seen the symbol of Horus. On your prescription where it has the RX, that's a symbol that comes from the symbol for the Eye of Horus. All right, because Horus at a certain point was associated with healing. Horus was the hero of the Egyptian mythology. Where Set is the enemy, Horus is the hero. And so Horus's job was to maintain Ma'at, to maintain order. All right? Make sure that the Nile keeps flowing. Make sure that the harvest comes in. And Set, he was trying to disrupt that order. So Set and Horus were constantly fighting. And in one of their fights, Set damages Horus's eye. And later on, it's restored to him, it's healed. And so that's where he gets associated with healing, and our RX symbol comes from the Eye of Horus. So, like I said, really quick overview of Egyptian gods and goddesses. Because when we get into the plagues, these plagues aren't just a natural disaster that happened. These plagues aren't just God getting angry. These plagues are God bringing judgment against the gods of Egypt. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Exodus chapter 12, verse 12. Like I said, I'm going to go back over all the plagues and kind of describe them in depth, but this is right before the Passover, right before the 10th plague, where the angel came through and killed the firstborn of every household. Verse 12, chapter 12, verse 12. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am Yahweh. So I want us to look at the plagues, not just what we have in our English translation, not just what we may have learned in Sunday school as kids, but I want us to look at the plagues, how the Egyptians would have seen the plagues. I want us to look at the plagues, how the Israelites living in Egypt would have seen these plagues. Not as just terrible things that happen, not as just, man, we're having a rough time, but as specific judgments against the gods of Egypt. And ultimately, specific judgments against Pharaoh himself. So the first plague that we have, and that's back in chapter 7, you don't have to turn there. First plague that comes, God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. Let my people go out into the wilderness to worship me. If you remember a few weeks ago, God promised Moses, this is going to be a sign to you. When you bring the people back to this mountain to worship me, that's your sign that you're on my path. And so God tells Moses, go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go, because they're going to go out in the wilderness. They're going to go out to the mountain and worship God, to fulfill that sign for Moses. And Pharaoh says, no. Pharaoh was using the Israelites as his workforce. They were building cities for him. So when Moses comes to Pharaoh and says, hey, your entire workforce wants to take off. We're going to go hang out in the wilderness. Doesn't ever say anything about coming back. Pharaoh's, of course, his response is no chance. Even when Moses says, Yahweh says to let his people go, Pharaoh's response is, I don't know who Yahweh is. No, you're not going to go. So God tells Moses and Aaron to go to the Nile and to put Aaron's staff in the Nile. And when he does that, it turns to blood. and the fish die, and all the drinking water in Egypt turns to blood. And Moses says, let my people go. Well, Pharaoh, you see, Pharaoh, he's not just the king. In Egyptian belief, in Egyptian mythology, Pharaoh was the incarnation of Horus. Pharaoh was Horus embodied. And as such, it was Pharaoh's responsibility to keep order. And not just social order in the land as king, but it was his responsibility and his expectation to keep cosmic order, natural order in the land. So when Moses comes and Aaron dips his staff into the Nile and it turns to blood, Pharaoh has a problem. Pharaoh has a challenger against his rule, against his power, saying, look what I can do. So Pharaoh talks with his magician priests, and when I say magician, don't think like, is this your card kind of magicians. These were men that were priests that were dedicated to making sure that the cycle kept on. The traditions that they did, the rituals that they did every day to commemorate the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun, the rituals that they did to take part in the death and resurrection of their kings, that's who these magician priests were. And Pharaoh looks at them and they're able to replicate what Moses did. They take water and they turn it to blood. And Pharaoh says, okay, Moses isn't a threat. No, I'm not letting the people go. For the Egyptian people, the Nile was life. The Nile, every year it flooded and it gave life. And it wasn't just a flood like we see here, but it's these monstrous floods that flood the whole area and give fertilizer and give nutrients to the ground so that the Egyptian people can grow food. The Nile is life. And as such, they had gods of the Nile. There's a god, Hapi, who was the embodiment of the flood, of the Nile's yearly flood. There was also the god it's difficult to say it, Kahum. All right, who was a ram-headed god, but he was believed to be the one that creates bodies. He's the one that forms human beings. He has a potter's wheel that he forms. He gives human beings form on his potter's wheel. If you skip back to the beginning of Exodus, when Pharaoh's telling the midwives to kill the babies, he tells the midwives, when the Israelite women come to them and you see the baby on the potter's wheel, to kill it then. All right, so Pharaoh's saying, when you see this baby being formed, when you see this baby still in the womb, kill it. Kum was also responsible for the sources of the Nile. He was in charge of the caves that they believed that the Nile sprang forth from. So when Moses came and disrupts the flow of the Nile, when Moses comes and takes away the life-giving water, God is not only making a statement against Pharaoh, but he's making a statement against Hapi. He's making a statement against Horus. He's making a statement against Kum. He's making a statement against these gods that the Egyptians believed gave them life. And God said, no, that's me. I'm going to put a stop to that. I'm the one who brings life. I'm the one who keeps order. We can go further. The next plague is the plague of frogs. The frogs come out of the Nile and they cover the countryside. They're in the houses. They're in the beds. They're everywhere. Kahum had a wife named Heket. When Kahum created the body, Heket was believed to breathe life into that body. Kahet was also the goddess of frogs. So when Moses came, he turned their life water into blood. And then the goddess that's supposed to breathe life into people can't control the plague of frogs that's coming in. Again, God's saying, your gods aren't the ones that hold on to order. Your gods can't compare to me. Your gods can't save you. I'm the one who controls this. Going the next two plagues, the plagues of gnats and the plagues of biting flies. This necessarily isn't against one specific god, but it says the people were covered in these gnats and he covered in these biting flies, and these things were unclean to the Egyptians. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote that the magician priests, the ones who made sure that the rituals got done, the ones who made sure that order continued on Pharaoh's behalf, Herodotus wrote that every day they would shave themselves so that no gnats or lice or bugs would be on their bodies to desecrate them, to make them unclean. And these next two plagues, the country is full of these gnats and these flies. And that disrupts their whole religion. That disrupts their whole ceremony. That disrupts their whole ritual. Because these priests can't do the rituals because they're unclean. God's saying the rituals that you're doing, that's not it. That's not what's controlling this. The rituals that you're doing, that's not what's bringing order and peace to the land. It's only by my hand. The next plague was the death of the livestock. Two of the most common images in Egyptian mythology is a falcon or a bird of prey and a cow. Isis, in some depictions, is depicted with a cow's head. There are many other goddesses and gods that are depicted with a cow's head. They had these specific cattle that were symbols of their gods, these living cows that when that cow got old and died, they would mummify this cow as an image of their god. One of the cows, the Opus cow, the Opus bull. These cattle were a symbol of the gods themselves. And the next plague, God strikes down the cattle. Next plague, God strikes the cattle to death. Moving on from that, the sixth plague is the plague of boils. In the plague of boils, we see these magician priests coming in, and the Bible tells us that they couldn't stand in Moses' presence because the boils were so bad. Now, we don't know if that's figuratively they just couldn't match up to Moses, or if it's literally they were so afflicted with these boils that they could not physically stand before Moses. But the Egyptians had a goddess named Sekhmet. Sorry, Sekhmet. This goddess was originally sent to earth by Ra, by their sun god, to judge rebellious human beings with plagues and with sickness. And when she relented, she healed those plagues and that sickness. So the Egyptians, when they were looking for healing, that was one of their goddesses that they prayed to. Praying to this goddess against plagues. And God sends a plague of boils saying, Sekhmet isn't stronger than I am. Sekhmet isn't the one that controls things. Over and over again, these plagues are throwing down the gods of Egypt, desecrating the gods of Egypt, embarrassing the gods of Egypt, and everything that they're supposed to hold on to. God's saying, I'm in charge. Moving on, I don't want to keep us all day, but the next plague is the plague of hail. These hailstones. And the Bible tells us that Moses went to Pharaoh and gave him a fair warning, saying, this is going to be the next plague. When this plague comes, make sure all of your servants are inside. Make sure any cattle that you have left over is inside, because if they're out in the field working, they're going to die. And the Bible tells us that Pharaoh's servants, people that in Pharaoh's court that heard Moses give this proclamation, they believed him. And they brought their own servants inside. They brought their own cattle inside. So even Pharaoh's own people are seeing Moses and seeing the things that God is doing. And they're losing faith in their own gods. They're losing faith in Shu, who is supposed to be upholding the heavens, but he can't stop the hail from falling. They're losing faith in Nut, who is the goddess of the sky, but can't stop the hail from falling. And they're understanding that it's Yahweh that controls things. The next plague was a plague of locusts. And this plague was against the god Osiris. Although he was god of the dead, he was also credited with the harvest. The locusts came and ate all the crops. The crops that weren't destroyed by the hail, the locusts came and ate what was left. And Osiris couldn't bring the harvest to the people. In the next plague, in the ninth plague, we see a plague of darkness. There's darkness all over the land. And of course, one of their chief gods is Ra, the god of the sun. And God says, no, Ra can't shine on you today. I'm in control of him. I'm in control of the sun. But it goes further than that. Like I said, things are cyclical. So the belief was that Ra was born in the morning, and by the evening he died. And through the night he traveled again, and he was born in the morning, and in the evening he died. So when the sun wasn't shining, their God was dead. So this God that's supposed to bring the dawn, this God that's supposed to shine light on you, this living God, Yahweh says, no, he's staying dead. I'm not allowing him to rise. I'm not allowing him to shine. Because he's a weak God. He's an incomplete God. Yahweh is the one who lets things run like it's supposed to. Yahweh is the one who brings order out of chaos. And the last plague was a plague directly at Pharaoh. As the incarnation of Horus, it was part of Pharaoh's job to have a son, so that that son could be the next Horus. And Yahweh came into Egypt and said, I'm cutting off your line. I'm ending the cycle. Horus isn't the one that creates order. Horus isn't the one that brings peace. It's Yahweh and Yahweh alone. There are 9 major gods in Egypt, plus Horus, so 10 major gods. And God took 10 plagues to show the Egyptians that their gods are nothing, that their gods are untrustworthy, that their gods are broken, that their gods are failing, and that He is the one who truly keeps Ma'at. He is the one that truly brings order and peace and justice. After each plague, the Bible tells us that Pharaoh's heart was hardened against Moses. After each plague, Pharaoh tried to get his magicians to replicate it so that he could feel some sort of power. After each plague, he hardened his heart because he couldn't admit at that point that he doesn't control things. After each plague, Pharaoh couldn't let go and let the people go. He had to hold on to that control. Because if he had let go, then he would have had to admit that he's not the one that holds on to order. He would have had to admit that Yahweh is the one that brings order to the land. And he couldn't do that. Like I said, this isn't a normal sermon. This is more of a teaching, more of a lesson, but I do have to ask, what chaos are we facing in our lives? What disorder are we facing in our lives? Maybe it's family issues, maybe it's problems at home, maybe it's being dissatisfied with your job. Maybe it's, I don't know what it is that you're facing, that part of your life is out of order. Are you trying so hard to hold on to it? Are you trying so hard to keep that order? God showed the gods of Egypt that He's the one who holds on to order, that He's the one who brings peace, that He's the one who brings justice. And He wants you to see that today in your own life. That He's the one that can bring peace. That no matter how hard we try and hold on to our control, we have to let go. Because He's the only peace that we'll find. These other things that we try and rely on, they're broken gods. They're failed gods. We have to put our faith and our trust in Yahweh alone to bring us peace and to bring us order and to drive away the chaos out of our lives. So this morning, as Miss Angie brings a song of invitation, you have the same option that Pharaoh had. Are you going to let go this morning? The thing that's weighing you down, the thing that's holding you back, are you going to let go? Or are you going to harden that heart? You're going to harden your grip on it. Yahweh, God is the only one that can bring true peace. He's the only one that can bring order to your life. We try so hard on our own to bring this to our own lives, but every time we fail, every time we fall, every time it becomes too much for us. And God wants us to see that He's the one in control. That He is the one who is stronger than all of the chaos. He is the one that's bigger than all of the disorder in our life. And He just wants us to come to Him. So I invite you this morning, come as we stand.